YouTube. How the hell are you? It's Iconic Bilo bringing you Shrouded Secrecy, a series where I dive into the history that is quickly covered up by the government to show you the truth and everything in between. But first, as a warning, although many people have heard some of these stories, I will expand on them and challenge you to expand the way you think as well. This video may contain graphic content or language, so if you are sensitive to that, make sure you are warned, and if you really feel like it, cover your ears at those points. Today, we are covering the use of POW camps, concentration camps, and we will also cover the important ones, and how they really kind of affected what was going on at that time, and maybe a few percentages to see how bad either conditions were or what they were really doing to these people. The ones we will cover in this video will be starting at the Civil War and go all the way to about World War II, maybe a little bit beyond, depending on how far this video goes. So, depending on the time, we'll see how far we get. Now, let's look into the Civil War and the POW camps and how many people died because of them. We'll look at the biggest concentration camps of this war, and there were really kind of three major ones that I could find the numbers directly on. In the Union, there was two major POW camps. One was in Chicago, Illinois, and one was up the road from me in Elmira, New York. Camp Douglas, which was in Chicago, had 23% of the people that was in it during the entire time of the war were dead, and was considered the Anderson of the North, which Anderson was in Georgia, and that was the camp that was for the Confederate Army. And the one in Elmira, New York, was started as a training facility for the Union Army, but was eventually transformed into a POW camp, which contained 12,000 people at its max, and around 3,000 people died during its tenure as a POW camp for the huge percent of a 25%. Now, other than the concentration camps of World War II, I could not find another percent that was that big, that was that significant. So, really, that is an amazing percent. Like, if there was 10 more thousand people in there, that would be quite a bit. You know what I'm saying? That would be quite a bit of people at that time, especially when we only had a couple million, maybe, living in the entire world. Whereas the Confederate soldiers had POW camps as well, but Anderson, Georgia had the massive amount of deaths of 13,000 people and the huge amount of prisoners of 45,000. Although these camps were not protected like they were in World War II, they weren't protected by the governments or anything like that because no legislation has come into pass yet. So they really kind of just said, F you, okay, screw you guys, we're going to do whatever the hell we feel like to you because you're our prisoner. Now we're going to move into World War I and World War II and some of the horrors of World War II. But first we have to start in between. Before we push into World War I and World War II, we have to talk about something called the Hague Convention, which isn't really something you really kind of learn about in school, but I really felt like it needs to be covered because it really kind of set the ground rules for what was allowed in war and what wasn't allowed to be done in prisoner of war camps. And this really kind of laid the ground rules for in between World War I and World War II's layout of what you're allowed to do in war and what you're not. Now, I'm going to start out with what we didn't accept, and then I'm going to tell you what everybody else accepted. The Hague Convention was from 1899 to 1907, something that isn't very covered in school. The United States never accepted not to use gas or gas missiles, where every other country agreed. Now, if you look at World War I, as most of you guys have learned, Germany used gas all the time. They used mustard gas to get people out of the trenches. But even before World War I, we were worried about it. And the thing is, the United States never signed on to that. They didn't care what this convention said or what any other government said that they needed to do because we're the United States. We can do it anyway. Now, this convention laid out the ground rules for what World War I and World War II and for what was illegal and what will be disciplined. Another thing that was laid out was the quarters for the POWs and refugees had to meet the standards of the army that they were prisoner of, which was really, really kind of good for the ground rules of what war needed to be done. If you think about it, if we treated everybody like we treated the blacks back in the day when they were slaves, how would the prisoners feel like they were being treated? Yes, they're prisoners. Yes, we're supposed to treat them like crap, but they need to at least have worth of life in order for them not to try and leave, something like that. So this really kind of laid the ground rules for something that was really kind of big during the World War One, World War Two time, which is the thought of a crime against humanity. Now, although there were many POW camps during World War One, and many people died, being around 5.5 million people being in camps in Russia, Germany, Britain, and France. There were no specific numbers and no specific names of camps. I searched for a very, very long time for that. And I really kind of wanted to bring you guys that information, but I couldn't really find any distinctive answers on that. So I really apologize for that. But the major thing about World War One is that gas, which we never signed a treaty for, killed more people in the war than POW camps in the entire war. Now, we're going to start moving into the deepest part of this commentary, World War II. We're going to start out with what everybody knows, which is really kind of the Geneva Conference in between World War I and World War II, where we started laying out what was going wrong in wars and why all the POWs were having major problems. And then we're going to push into a little bit about Germany and Auschwitz, and then we're going to start pushing into Japan and what we did wrong that we see as right, which isn't really covered in school, so we're going to have a little bit of fun with this part. But before World War II broke out, at the Geneva Conference, the Red Cross spoke about something called the barbed wire disease. And it happened a lot during France and Germany during World War I because of all of the outbreaks of POW camps and captured soldiers. This was the early set-on of mental illness and what we call PTSD now. They were even being affected by it then, before it had a name, and they were committing suicide. They were feeling horrible about themselves. They didn't know what the hell was going on, and they were starting to become schizophrenic, a few of them. And it's just really, really crazy to look back at some of these people. Now, it was never said that the prisoners should be interned in Switzerland, a neutral country. There were a few countries that were not on the same terms as Germany and Austria-Hungary that believed that harsh conditions would reduce the number of traitors. The countries in the East continued their fight to help the Red Cross with support. At the end of the war, Franco-German agreement was made that both countries would exchange a small number of prisoners, but the French kept a small number of Germans, while the Germans released all the French prisoners, which I feel is a very big thing if you think about it. You make an agreement at the end of World War I that we're going to release all your prisoners, we'll release all of ours, and we keep a couple back that we feel are either important to us or may give us the knowledge to either do something to you or do something big that's going to set the world in motion a little bit. This is the first set of problems of POW and concentration camps that was really kind of shown to the entire world. This kind of put a face to what the POW camps and barbed wire disease was having an effect to people. And this was the beginning of an outcry that lasted until even modern times nowadays, and a hidden outcry that no one really covers. We will start out with the concentration camps in Europe, then push across the ocean to the US and cover the concentration camps that were here, which is scary. In the huge size of Germany that contained France, Poland, and a few Baltic states, there were 6 different kinds of hostage camps. And that's where you really kind of need to start. There was one that contained prisoners of armies, other than the Polish, because when the Polish were captured, they were put into the concentration camps. There were labor camps where they put the people that they knew could work and put them towards getting the stuff done that they needed for the war effort. They used inmates to do strenuous labor for long, hard days. POW camps were very short time camps. They were all moved into either labor camps or extermination camps, depending on either their mass, body build, whatever the hell they needed at that point. There was re-education camps where they re-educated Poles to teach them Nazi ideologies. And the extermination camps, as everybody knows, where they killed people who weren't able to work in the work camps and were connected to larger extermination camps, as seen by something like Auschwitz, which also had a couple other buildings connected to it. Now we're going to begin looking at the sheer numbers of what happened in these horrible camps in Germany. But I can't really tell you of how many people passed through these specific camps because they didn't really keep a record of who passed through. They kept a record of who died there. So I'm going to be giving you the numbers of how many people died there, not how many people were actually there and the percentages and stuff like that, like I did for the American ones. So first we're going to start out with the highest kills and go down towards the lower. And of course, I'll give you the amount that died throughout the entire war in the POW camps. So first was Auschwitz II at 1 million. Next was Belzec at 600,000. 600,000, and Chelmarino at 320,000, sorry. These camps don't even cover the huge amount of deaths of 5.5 million prisoner of war camp deaths during World War I, but yet is considered a bigger crime to humanity because of the 6.5 million Jews, Gypsies, twins, and mentally ill Europeans that were killed because of the Nazis. Although the Nazi concentration camps and extermination camps were destroyed after the war, some were made into permanent memorials. In communist Poland, some camps such as Majdanek, Jaworso, Police, and Auschwitz were created to remember everybody who died in the war and in POW camps. And then there's also a few other ones in Germany, Sicily, and the Ukraine, as always. Currently, there are memorials to both camps in Poltis, and they have been helped to enable the German-Polish discussion on historical perception of World War II, which they're trying to increase the knowledge of what happened in Buchenwald and a few other places. Now they're used for more like a prison and stuff like that. There's a few places like that. Now, although all of this is bad, and most people think that this is one of the biggest atrocities ever done to all of the world, in sheer numbers, yes, I completely agree, but in ideologies and stuff like that, we did the same exact thing during World War II. We took all of the Japanese Americans in the United States and that were coming over here and put them in something called internment camps, which also could be considered concentration camps as well. We took all of their property and sold it, and a couple years later, all we did to them was give them I think it was $10,000 from George Bush Sr. saying, "We're sorry for what we did, but this is how we're going to pay you back." Now, at the end of World War II, what we did for the Jews is we gave them a country. Now, although we didn't do this for the Japanese, I still feel like just because the Holocaust had bigger numbers doesn't mean that it wasn't affecting the same way. If we sat here and looked at this every time, every year, just like the Holocaust, I think more people would say that this is just as racist as something like the Holocaust or genocide that has happened in Croatia and things like that. So I'm going to give you a little background on Japanese internment camps and people that died there and things like that. Japanese internment camps, or concentration camps, as they were called by the Japanese, happened at the same time as the Holocaust, but isn't as covered as much as it. These camps began in the United States and took over all of the Japanese on the West Coast properties and sold it, and put them into camps so that way we could control what they did and what they didn't do. Now, although there were only 20 reported dead, I feel that it could probably be a hell of a lot higher, just because they're not going to mark down everybody who was there, and they're not going to mark down everybody who had died. Just because it is a POW camp, I really don't feel like they're going to give them as much respect, just like the Nazis didn't give the Jewish and the Gypsies as much respect as they deserved. Now, I feel like a lot of the deaths were also covered up just because they didn't want it to sound as bad as the Holocaust, especially after they went through and liberated all of the Jews and everything else in Germany and Poland. Especially with them putting the SS officers on trial just because of the atrocities they did to them. Now, I feel like if they didn't go to trial themselves, then possibly these Japanese people weren't as liberated. Now, there were over 120,000 Japanese American people that we decided to take and put in these camps. Now, these camps, I guess, were as nice as they possibly can be, I guess, but that doesn't make it equal. You know what I'm saying? We took them out of their homes and jobs that they sat there and worked their asses off for, and we gave them a little stick-built house just chilling in the middle of a field. And that's ridiculous to me, and I don't see why not only do we not learn about this, but why isn't it created as equal to the Holocaust and things like that, where we treat Holocaust survivors as like gods, but yet we don't hear anything about Japanese internment survivors or anything like that. Now, we're going to start moving on to things that are more recent, such as Guantanamo Bay and such. But first, I'd like to give you my opinion on what should happen with it and what we should be doing with these people that we are capturing from Al-Qaeda. I feel like Guantanamo should be completely open, but I don't feel like we should be torturing them in order to get information, because they are just going to tell us whatever we want in order to hear. And the reason I feel that is because if we're sitting here torturing them every single day, and that's all they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, you can't tell me you wouldn't tell them whatever they wanted to hear. Or you can't tell me that you wouldn't do whatever it takes to get the hell out of there. You know, if you have them trapped, you have them in a place where they are cared for and taken care of, whatever they need, normal human needs, then I don't see a problem with it. If we're making ourselves safe, putting them in a jail, essentially, as long as they're convicted of what they did, I don't see a problem with it. And that's where I think they're going wrong with it. They're not convicting people, they're not doing anything like that, and they're taking it more of a black site. I'll give you guys a little bit more information on those, but let's make sure we get all of the facts here on Guantanamo Bay and what they do to these people in the black site on Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay is where we hold prisoners of war and torture them. We all know this, and it's been coming up to close quite a few times now, and it keeps getting pushed back, and I guess a few people really kind of want to know about it. Out of all the detainees that have been there, there have been around 30 attempted deaths, and 5 have suffered life-threatening injuries or people that have died. Now, I really think that this number is really quite low, but nobody really knows for sure. I guess we'll never really find out until probably 10, 20, 30, 40 years later. Let's talk about the things that are out of schools and out of records, just because you guys really need to know what's going on in these black sites. Things like waterboarding, where they'll put a rag over your face and pour water into it so that way you feel like you're drowning. Now think about what that would make you feel like. Like, you would feel like crap after that. And meanwhile, they're asking you questions, and if you don't give them the right answer, they continue doing it. As I said, you would end up giving them the right answer as soon as you possibly could. They're flushing the Quran, which is the belief system of the Islams. Obviously, if you're religious, that's going to affect you quite a bit. Disgracing them on what they find offensive, such as Islams, they'll put naked women in there, make them piss and shit themselves. This is just what they do, and this is just the start of what they do to disgrace these people. And truthfully, I understand needing the information, but you can't judge on how good this intel is. You don't know the last time they talked to these people. You don't know the last time or when they saw these people, so you can't really judge on how good the intel is. So there are a few reasons that I feel that these things are covered up, and just because these things are covered up doesn't mean that it makes them less confusing. Many things that the government does in black sites across the entire world, not just here in the United States, not just in Guantanamo Bay, but they're everywhere. Like, they'll take somebody right off the street if they feel that it's needed for them. I understand in death situations you got to do what you got to do, but if it's not imminent threat, you should not be doing it. These black sites are places that the CIA or the FBI use to interrogate people of interest, such as Osama bin Laden, whoever the hell they feel like taking off the street. They use many different types of torture, as I've said before, and there could be many other places like Guantanamo Bay or many other sites even in a house near you. You don't really know where these places are, and nobody's really ever going to tell you, because these sites are supposed to be hidden, so that way they can do whatever the hell they want without giving the people the rights that they need. Now, I feel like the Japanese internment camps need to be widespread. They need to be told to everybody. This is something that happened in our past that needs to be more widespread. It needs to be on the equal of something similar to the Holocaust or what happened in Serbia and Croatia. Now, as always, I'm Iconic Bilo. I'm going to give you the normal problems and the little bit of an outro that I have. Although there were many more that we could have talked about and I could inform you guys about if you comment down below. I feel that these were the biggest, either size-wise or impact-wise. I feel that the Japanese internment camps, as I said, have had a huge impact, just like the Holocaust, but haven't been really talked about. And I feel like if we push them more into schools, then we'll feel maybe not as patriotic about our country, and maybe not as, okay, they do everything the right way. And maybe we'll actually think about everything that they're doing instead of just blindly following them around like mice. I feel like this has changed the way the war has been waged and life has been lived. So I feel like if you guys have come out of this video with any bit more knowledge or anything, make sure you press the like button and subscribe if you really like it. And if you really enjoyed it, make sure to share it with your family. And